The wind howled across the Montana Valley like a wounded animal, carrying snow that stung exposed skin like tiny needles. Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat tighter as she drove past the Henderson Ranch, her headlights cutting through the white curtain of the blizzard. She had driven this route every day for 3 years, delivering mail to the remote properties scattered across the valley. The Henderson place always looked the same: neat fences, well-maintained barns, and horses grazing in the pastures. But today, something felt wrong. The mailbox stood at an odd angle, buried halfway in a snowdrift. More concerning was the complete absence of tracks leading in or out of the property. Old Tom Henderson was a creature of habit. By this hour, he would have already driven to town for his morning coffee, leaving tire marks on the gravel road. Sarah squinted through the falling snow toward the main house. No smoke rose from the chimney. The horses huddled together near the barn, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. She had met Tom only a handful of times. He was a quiet man in his 70s, stubborn and independent like most ranchers in these parts. His wife had passed away 5 years ago, and since then, he had managed the property alone, refusing offers of help from neighbors. Sarah respected that kind of determination, even if it bordered on foolishness. But the complete stillness of the property sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She turned her postal van onto the long driveway, wheels crunching through virgin snow. The Henderson Ranch sprawled across 200 acres, with the main house sitting like a fortress at the center. As she approached, she noticed the porch light still burning from the night before. The horses near the barn began moving, their ears pricked forward with interest. They looked thin, their ribs visible beneath their winter coats. She parked near the house and stepped out into the biting cold. The wind immediately stole her breath. She climbed the wooden steps to the porch, her boots leaving the first human footprints in days. Sarah knocked hard on the door, the sound hollow and urgent. No answer came. She knocked again, harder this time, calling out Tom's name. Still nothing. Her heart began to race. The door was unlocked. Sarah hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. The house was freezing inside, barely warmer than the air outside. She called out again, moving through the entryway into the living room. The television flickered silently, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A coffee mug sat on the side table, its contents long since cold. Then she heard it, a weak cough coming from down the hallway. She found Tom in his bedroom, buried under a mountain of blankets. His face was pale and drawn, his lips cracked from dehydration. When he saw her, confusion flickered in his fevered eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Sarah immediately pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. Her mind raced through options as she knelt beside the bed. Tom's hand emerged from beneath the blankets, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were urgent, pleading. He managed to rasp out a single word that would haunt Sarah for days to come: horses. Then his strength failed, and his hand fell back onto the bed. Sarah pressed her fingers to his neck, finding a pulse that was weak but steady. She needed to get him help, but the nearest hospital was 40 miles away through a blizzard that showed no signs of letting up. The phone lines were dead. She was completely alone with a dying man and a ranch full of animals that hadn't been fed in days. Sarah's training as a volunteer EMT kicked in automatically. She checked Tom's vitals, noting his rapid, shallow breathing and burning fever. He was in serious trouble, likely pneumonia complicated by days without proper care or medication. She found his medicine bottles on the nightstand: heart medication, blood pressure pills, antibiotics that should have been taken days ago. The dates on the labels told a grim story. Tom had been sick for at least 4 days, too weak to care for himself or call for help. She ran to her van and grabbed the emergency supplies she kept for remote deliveries: water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, and most importantly, her emergency radio. Back in the house, she helped Tom sip water, supporting his head as he struggled to swallow. Each sip seemed to take monumental effort. His skin burned under her touch. She tried the radio, turning the dial through static until she found the emergency channel. Her voice was steady as she reported the situation, giving their exact location and Tom's condition. The dispatcher's response crushed her hopes. The storm had closed every road in the valley. Emergency services couldn't reach them until the weather cleared, which forecasts predicted wouldn't happen for at least another day, possibly 2. The ambulance might get stuck trying to reach them, creating an even worse emergency. The dispatcher's advice was simple but terrifying: keep Tom warm, hydrated, and comfortable. Monitor his breathing. Call back if his condition worsened. Then the radio crackled and fell silent as the battery warning light began to blink. Sarah sat on the edge of Tom's bed, her mind spinning. She was a mail carrier, not a doctor. She had no business trying to care for a critically ill man. But what choice did she have? She couldn't leave him to die alone. Tom's eyes opened slightly, fixing on her face. He whispered again, the same desperate word, horses. Sarah understood then that this man, even in his delirium, was more worried about his animals than himself. That kind of devotion demanded respect. She made Tom as comfortable as possible, stacking blankets around him and leaving water within reach. Then she went to explore the ranch. The barn was a massive structure that had clearly been built with pride and care. Inside, she found 12 horses in various stalls, their eyes large and anxious. Water troughs were empty, hay racks depleted. These animals had been waiting for help that hadn't come, their trust in their caretaker absolute even as hunger gnawed at their bellies. Sarah had grown up in the city. Her knowledge of horses came entirely from movies and books. They were enormous creatures, powerful and unpredictable. Fear coiled in her stomach as she approached the first stall. The horse inside, a massive chestnut gelding, stretched his neck toward her, nostrils flaring. She stood frozen, certain he would bite or kick. Instead, he simply looked at her with eyes that held a desperate kind of patience. He was asking for help in the only way he could. She found the feed room by following the smell of hay and grain. Tom kept everything organized with military precision. Feed charts hung on the wall, showing each horse's name, dietary requirements, and feeding schedule. Sarah studied the charts with growing panic. This wasn't just about throwing hay into stalls. Each horse had specific needs, some needed supplements, others required special grain mixtures. Medical conditions were noted next to several names. The responsibility felt crushing. But Tom's horses needed her, and more than that, Tom needed to know his animals would survive even if he didn't. Sarah began to work, reading the charts carefully and measuring out portions. Her hands shook as she approached each stall, terrified of making a mistake that could harm these magnificent creatures. The horses seemed to sense her fear but responded with surprising gentleness. They ate from the bucket she held, their warm breath washing over her frozen fingers. By the time she finished, darkness had fallen, and her entire body ached from effort and cold. She checked on Tom before settling into the living room for the night. His fever hadn't broken, but he seemed to be resting more peacefully. Sarah built a fire in the fireplace, more for comfort than warmth. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as she tried to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she had been worried about finishing her mail route before the storm hit. Now she was responsible for a man's life and the welfare of 12 horses she barely knew how to care for. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of eyes watching her from the darkness. Dawn broke gray and cold, the storm still raging with undiminished fury. Sarah woke stiff and sore on Tom's couch, her neck protesting from the awkward angle. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back: Tom, the horses, the isolation. She hurried to check on the rancher, finding him restless and mumbling in his sleep. His fever raged on. She managed to get more water and medication into him, but his condition hadn't improved. The emergency radio offered no better news. Roads remained impassable. They were still on their own. The horses needed her again. Sarah bundled herself in every warm layer she could find and trudged through knee-deep snow to the barn. The wind had sculpted the drifts into strange shapes that seemed almost alive in the half-light. Inside the barn, the horses greeted her with soft nickers. Despite her exhaustion and fear, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. These animals had come to recognize her. They trusted her to care for them, even though she was a stranger. She followed Tom's charts again, but this time she noticed details she had missed before. One horse, a gray mare named Duchess, barely touched her food. Another, a young bay stallion called Thunder, paced his stall anxiously. Sarah didn't know what these signs meant, but instinct told her something was wrong. She spent time with each horse, trying to see what Tom would have seen. Duchess's eyes looked dull, and when Sarah touched her neck, the mare flinched. Thunder's water bucket was full, but his hay was trampled into the bedding, uneaten. Desperation drove Sarah back to the house. She searched Tom's office, looking for anything that might help her understand. She found notebooks filled with observations about each horse, their personalities, health issues, behavioral quirks. Tom's handwriting was neat and careful, each entry dated and detailed. Sarah discovered that Duchess had a history of colic, a potentially fatal digestive condition. Thunder was still adjusting to the ranch, having been rescued from an abusive situation 6 months ago. He needed extra patience and a calm environment. Armed with this new knowledge, Sarah returned to the barn with different eyes. She spent an hour just sitting outside Duchess's stall, watching the mare's behavior. The horse moved slowly, occasionally looking at her sides. Sarah remembered reading that colic symptoms included lethargy and disinterest in food. Her heart sank. She had no idea how to treat a colicky horse, and with the storm still raging, veterinary help was impossible. She did the only thing she could. She stayed with Duchess, offering comfort through her presence. For Thunder, Sarah tried a different approach. Instead of rushing through his care, she moved slowly and spoke softly, letting him set the pace. She noticed how he startled at sudden movements, how his ears flicked nervously at every sound. She began narrating everything she did before doing it, her voice low and steady. Gradually, Thunder's tension eased. He approached the hay she offered, taking tentative bites. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The day passed in a blur of activity. Sarah moved between the house and barn, splitting her attention between Tom and the horses. She learned to read the animal's body language, to notice the subtle signs of distress or contentment. She discovered which horses liked to have their faces scratched and which preferred to be left alone. The massive creatures that had terrified her yesterday began to feel less like dangerous unknowns and more like individuals with distinct personalities. By evening, Duchess showed slight improvement. She had eaten a small amount of hay and seemed less uncomfortable. Sarah couldn't be sure if her intervention had helped or if the mare had simply recovered on her own, but the relief was overwhelming. She documented everything in Tom's notebook, hoping that if something happened to her, whoever found them next would know what had transpired. The act of writing felt important, like bearing witness to her promises to Tom and his horses. That night, exhaustion threatened to pull Sarah under. Her muscles screamed from unfamiliar work. Blisters had formed on her hands despite the gloves. But when she checked on Tom and found his fever finally beginning to break, hope flickered to life. He opened his eyes with more clarity than she had seen since finding him. He looked at her for a long moment before whispering a single word, "Thank you." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She had kept her promise. The horses were safe, and Tom was fighting his way back. The third morning brought a subtle change. The wind had lessened, though snow still fell steadily. Tom remained weak but conscious for longer periods. Sarah helped him eat soup she had made from cans in his pantry, her hands steadier now than they had been 2 days ago. He tried to apologize, but she wouldn't let him. She understood now what this ranch meant to him. These horses weren't just animals, they were his family, his purpose, his reason for getting up each morning. Tom managed to give her instructions between long rests. He told her about the horses' individual needs with a depth of knowledge that came from years of careful observation. He explained how to spot early signs of illness, how to read their behavior, how to earn their trust. Sarah absorbed every word, scribbling notes in the margins of his journals. She was beginning to understand that horsemanship wasn't about control, it was about partnership, communication, and respect. The horses had fully accepted her now. When she entered the barn, they greeted her with anticipation rather than wariness. She had learned their routines and personalities. Max, the oldest gelding, liked his breakfast early and would pin his ears if kept waiting. Luna, a delicate Arabian mare, needed encouragement to eat on cold days. Storm, a powerful quarter horse, had a gentle soul and would rest his massive head on her shoulder while she cleaned his stall. These small intimacies touched something deep in Sarah's heart. But the work was relentless. Caring for 12 horses meant constant physical labor. She hauled water when the automatic systems froze, broke ice from troughs, mucked stalls, distributed feed, checked hooves, and monitored health. Her back ached, her hands were raw, and she hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch. Yet she never considered stopping. These animals depended on her. Tom depended on her. She had become part of something larger than herself, and the responsibility felt sacred. On the 4th day, the storm finally began to break. Weak sunlight filtered through thinning clouds. The emergency radio crackled to life with news that plows were working to clear the main roads. Help would arrive soon. Sarah should have felt relieved, but instead, she felt an unexpected sadness. Her time on the ranch was ending. She would return to her regular life, delivering mail to strangers, her days predictable and solitary. Everything would go back to normal. Tom sensed her mood. He asked her to sit with him, and when she did, he took her hand in his weathered one. He told her about his late wife, about how they had built this ranch together from nothing. He spoke of the horses they had loved and lost, of the satisfaction that came from caring for creatures who couldn't care for themselves. He said something that would stay with Sarah forever: animals don't lie. They don't pretend. If you earn their trust, it's real. That's worth more than all the convenience in the world. Later, Sarah stood in the barn, watching the horses rest peacefully in their stalls. She thought about her life before this week, the small apartment, the lonely evenings, the sense that she was moving through her days without real connection to anything or anyone. She had always told herself she was content, that she valued her independence. But these 4 days had shown her what she had been missing. Purpose. Connection. The profound satisfaction of caring for living beings who needed her. Thunder approached his stall door as she passed, extending his nose toward her. Sarah stopped, placing her hand on his soft muzzle. He stood perfectly still, trusting her touch in a way that would have been impossible 4 days ago. She had helped heal something in this traumatized horse, just as the horses had healed something in her. The realization brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't just been feeding animals. She had been building relationships, learning a new language, discovering parts of herself she never knew existed. That evening, as Sarah prepared what might be her last meal in Tom's kitchen, she heard vehicles approaching. The cavalry had arrived, an ambulance, Tom's nephew from across the state, neighbors who had been worried when they couldn't reach him. They were amazed to find Tom alive and the horses healthy. The paramedics praised Sarah's care, saying her quick thinking and dedication had likely saved Tom's life. His nephew shook her hand vigorously, thanking her over and over. But as they loaded Tom into the ambulance, he caught Sarah's eye and mouthed something she almost missed, "Come back." She nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched the ambulance disappear down the cleared road, suddenly aware of how empty the ranch felt. She had one more night of caring for the horses before Tom's nephew would take over management. She intended to make it count, to memorize every detail of this place that had changed her so completely in such a short time. Christmas Eve arrived with brilliant sunshine and temperatures cold enough to make breath freeze instantly. Sarah had returned to her regular mail route, but she couldn't stop thinking about the ranch. She had visited Tom twice in the hospital, bringing him updates about the horses and listening to his plans for recovery. His nephew had managed the property competently, but Tom worried constantly. He felt the absence of his daily routines like a missing limb. As Sarah drove past the Henderson ranch that morning, she made an impulsive decision. She pulled into the driveway, telling herself she just wanted to check on the horses. Tom's nephew welcomed her warmly, clearly overwhelmed by the responsibility. He admitted he knew nothing about horses and was terrified of making a mistake that would disappoint his uncle. Sarah found herself offering to help, just for an hour. 1 hour became 3. 3 became 6. By evening, she had spent her entire day off working in the barn. The horses remembered her. They greeted her like an old friend, pressing against the stall doors for attention. Sarah moved through the routines Tom had taught her, finding joy in the familiar patterns. She talked to each horse as she worked, telling them about her week, her worries, her growing certainty that her old life no longer fit. Storm rested his head on her shoulder as she brushed him, his trust absolute. Luna nickered softly when Sarah scratched her favorite spot. These animals had claimed a piece of her heart. On Christmas morning, Sarah's phone rang before dawn. It was Tom, his voice stronger than she had heard since finding him. He told her the doctors were releasing him after Christmas, but with strict orders, no physical labor for at least 2 months. He needed someone to manage the ranch during his recovery. Before she could respond, he said something that made her heart stop. "I know you have your own life, Sarah. But if you wanted to learn ranching, really learn it, I could teach you. The horses already know you. They trust you. That's not something that happens every day." Sarah sat in her dark apartment, phone pressed to her ear, Tom's offer echoing in her mind. It was crazy. She had a steady job, benefits, a pension waiting at the end of her career. Ranching was uncertain, physically demanding, isolating. She would be starting over completely at 32 years old. Every practical consideration screamed that she should politely decline. But her heart had other ideas. She thought about the moment Thunder had first taken food from her hand, about Duchess surviving her colic scare, about the profound peace she felt in the barn. She called her supervisor that afternoon and gave her notice. The decision terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She spent Christmas Day packing her belongings, amazed at how little she actually cared about. Most of her possessions felt like anchors rather than treasures. What she needed for her new life could fit in her truck: clothes, books, and the notebooks where she had started documenting everything Tom taught her about horse care. Tom returned to the ranch 3 days after Christmas, moving slowly but with fierce determination. Sarah had spent those days preparing, deep cleaning the house, organizing the barn, and spending hours with each horse. When Tom's nephew's truck pulled up, she felt nervous as a teenager meeting their date's parents. But when Tom saw the ranch, the clean stalls, the healthy horses, the careful maintenance of everything he valued, his eyes filled with tears. They established a new routine. Tom supervised from a chair, his decades of experience guiding Sarah's hands. He taught her to spot lameness before it became serious, to understand the subtle language of ears and tail position, to feel the difference between a horse that was merely tired and one that was ill. Sarah absorbed everything, her notebook filling with sketches and observations. She made mistakes, plenty of them, but Tom's patience never wavered. He had found something rare, someone who genuinely wanted to learn and who the horses accepted without reservation. Months passed, seasons changed. Spring brought new foals and longer days. Summer meant trail rides and the satisfaction of watching the horses thrive. Fall brought preparation for winter. Through it all, Sarah discovered muscles she never knew she had and a capacity for contentment that had eluded her entire adult life. She was exactly where she belonged. On the anniversary of the storm that had brought her into Tom's life, Sarah stood in the barn at dawn, coffee warming her hands. The horses dozed peacefully in their stalls, safe and content. Tom had trusted her with the morning feeding now, his recovery complete but his pace permanently slowed. She thought about the person she had been a year ago, isolated, lonely, moving through life without real purpose. That Sarah felt like a stranger now. Storm approached his stall door, and Sarah reached up to scratch his face. He leaned into her touch, eyes half closed in pleasure. This, she thought, was the Christmas miracle no one talked about. Not the dramatic rescue or the storm survived, but the quiet transformation that happened when you opened yourself to connection. When you allowed yourself to be needed and to need in return. Tom appeared in the barn doorway, moving with his characteristic slowness. He watched Sarah work for a moment before speaking. You know, my wife always said that horses have a way of choosing their people. I didn't believe her until now. Sarah turned, confused. Tom continued, these horses chose you, Sarah. That first morning when you walked in here scared out of your mind, they could have been difficult. But they weren't. They recognized something in you that you hadn't even seen in yourself yet. Sarah felt tears threaten but blinked them back. They saved me, she said simply. I was just existing before. Now I'm living. Tom nodded, understanding in his weathered face. They worked together in comfortable silence, two people who had found family in unexpected places. Outside, the sun climbed higher, promising another day of purpose, connection, and the profound satisfaction of caring for creatures who depended on them completely. The ranch would continue, generation after generation of horses finding their home in these pastures. And Sarah had found her home too, not in a place but in a purpose. The woman who had stopped to check on a sick rancher and his hungry horses had discovered the life she was always meant to live. Sometimes the best gifts arrive wrapped in crisis, and the greatest love stories aren't about romance at all, they're about the bonds we form when we choose to show up, day after day, for those who need us most.